Hello everyone and welcome to the second episode of Storytime with Mr. Haque. So yesterday we began reading this. It's a book called I, Robot and it's written by Isaac Asimov. It's a collection of short stories about, naturally enough, robots. The first story in the series is called Robbie, and that's what we began reading yesterday. Robbie is a short story about a girl called Gloria and her friendship with her robot, Robbie. Before we pick up where we left off, one of the things that came across for me yesterday quite powerfully was this idea about the importance of stories. You may remember one of the ways that Gloria manages to convince Robbie to do as she wants, kind of manipulating him really, is by promising to telling him the story of Cinderella, and also threatening him with taking away the story if he doesn't follow her wishes. So we're going to carry on. Where we left off yesterday was where Gloria and Robbie had been separated by Gloria's mother, and Robbie had been banished outdoors. George Weston was comfortable. It was a habit of his to be comfortable on Sunday afternoons. A good, hearty dinner below the hatches, a nice, soft, dilapidated couch on which to sprawl, a copy of the Times, slippered feet and shirtless chest. How could anyone help but be comfortable? He wasn't pleased, therefore, when his wife walked in. After 10 years of married life, he was still so unutterably foolish as to love her, and there was no question that he was always glad to see her. Still, Sunday afternoons, just after dinner, were sacred to him, and his idea of solid comfort was to be left in utter solitude for 2 or 3 hours. Consequently, he fixed his eye firmly upon the latest reports of the Lefebvre-Yoshida expedition to Mars. This was one to take off from lunar base and might actually succeed, and pretended she wasn't there. Mrs. Weston waited patiently for 2 minutes, then impatiently for 2 more, and finally broke the silence. George. George, I say, will you put down that paper and look at me? The paper rustled to the floor, and Weston turned a wary face towards his wife. What is it, dear? You know what it is, George. It's Gloria and that terrible machine. What terrible machine? Now, don't pretend you don't know what I'm talking about. It's that robot Gloria calls Robbie. He doesn't leave her for a moment. Well, why should he? He's not supposed to, and he certainly isn't a terrible machine. He's the best darn robot money can buy, and I'm damn sure he set me back half a year's income. He's worth it, though. Darn sight cleverer than half my office staff. He made a move to pick up the paper again, but his wife was quicker and snatched it away. You listen to me, George. I won't have my daughter entrusted to a machine, and I don't care how clever it is. It has no soul, and no one knows what it may be thinking. A child just isn't made to be guarded by a thing of metal. Weston frowned. When did you decide this? He's been with Gloria 2 years now, and I haven't seen you worry till now. It was different at first. It was a novelty. It took a load off me, and it was a fashionable thing to do. But now, I don't know. The neighbours? Well, what have the neighbours to do with it? Now look, a robot is infinitely more to be trusted than a human nursemaid. Robbie was constructed for only one purpose, really, to be the companion of a little child. His entire mentality has been created for the purpose. He just can't help being faithful and loving and kind. He's a machine, made so. That's more than you can say for humans. But something might go wrong. Some... Mrs. Weston was a bit hazy about the insides of a robot. Some little jigger will come loose and the awful thing will go berserk and... She couldn't bring herself to complete the quite obvious thought. Nonsense, Weston denied with an involuntary nervous shiver. That's completely ridiculous. We had a long discussion at the time we brought Robbie about the first law of robotics. You know that it's impossible for a robot to harm a human life. That long before enough can go wrong to alter that first law, a robot would be completely inoperable. It's a mathematical impossibility. Besides, I have an engineer from US Robots here twice a year to give the poor gadget a complete overhaul. Why, there's no more chance of anything at all going wrong with Robbie than there is of you or I suddenly going loopy. Considerably less, in fact. Besides, how are you going to take him away from Gloria? He made another futile stab at the paper, and his wife tossed it angrily into the next room. That's just it, George. She won't play with anyone else. There are dozens of little boys and girls that she should make friends with, but she won't. She won't go near them unless I make her. That's no way for a little girl to grow up. You want her to be normal, don't you? You want her to be able to take part in society? You're jumping at shadows, Grace. Pretend Robbie's a dog. I've seen hundreds of children who would rather have their dog than their father. A dog is different, George. We must get rid of that horrible thing. You can sell it back to the company. I've asked, and you can. You've asked? Now look here, Grace. Let's not go off the deep end. We're keeping the robot until Gloria is older, and I don't want the subject brought up again. And with that, he walked out of the room in a huff. Mrs. Weston met her husband at the door 2 evenings later. You'll have to listen to this, George. There's bad feeling in the village. About what? Asked Weston. He stepped into the washroom and drowned out any possible answer by the splash of water. Mrs. Weston waited. She said, about Robbie. Weston stepped out, towel in hand, face red and angry. What are you talking about? Oh, it's been building up and building up. I've tried to close my eyes to it, but I'm not going to do any more. Most of the villagers consider Robbie dangerous. Children aren't allowed to go near our place in the evenings. We trust our child with the thing. Well, perhaps people aren't reasonable about these things. Then help to hell with them. Saying that doesn't solve the problem. I've got to do my shopping down there. I've got to meet them every day, and it's even worse in the city these days when it comes to robots. New York has just passed an ordinance keeping all robots off the streets between sunset and sunrise. All right, but they can't stop us from keeping a robot in our home. Grace, this is one of your campaigns. I recognise it, but it's no use. The answer is still no. We're keeping Robbie. And yet he loved his wife, and what was worse, his wife knew it. George Weston, after all, was only a man, poor thing, and his wife made use of every device which a clumsier and more scrupulous sex has learned with reason and futility to fear. 10 times in the ensuing week he cried, "Robbie stays, and that's final," and each time it was weaker and accompanied by a louder and more agonized groan. Come the day at last when Weston approached his daughter guiltily and suggested a beautiful Visivox show in the village. Gloria clapped her hands happily. Can Robbie go? No, dear, he said, and winced at the sound of his voice. They won't allow robots at the Visibox. But you can tell him all about it when you get home. He stumbled all over the last few words and looked away. Gloria came back from town bubbling over with enthusiasm, for the Visivox had been a gorgeous spectacle indeed. She waited for her father to manoeuvre the jet car into the sunken garage. Wait till I tell Robbie, Daddy. He would have liked it like anything, especially when Francis Fran was backing away so quietly and backed right into one of the leopard men and had to run. She laughed again. Daddy, are they really leopard men on the moon? Probably not, said Weston absently. It's just funny make-believe. He couldn't take much longer with the car. He'd have to face it. Gloria ran across the lawn. Robbie! Robbie! And she stopped suddenly at the sight of a beautiful collie which regarded her out of serious brown eyes as it wagged its tail on the porch. Oh, what a nice dog! Gloria climbed the steps, approached quietly and patted it. Is it for me, Daddy? Her mother had joined them. Yes, it is, Gloria. Isn't it nice, soft and furry? It's very gentle. It likes little girls. Can he play games? Surely he can do a number of tricks. Would you like to see some? Right away. I want Robbie to see him too. Robbie! She stopped uncertainly and frowned. I bet he's just staying in his room because he's mad at me for not taking him to the Visivox. You will have to explain to him, Daddy. He might not believe me, but he knows if you say it, it's so. Weston's lips grew tighter. He looked towards his wife, but could not catch her eye. Gloria turned precipitously and ran down the basement steps, shouting as she went. Robbie, come and see what Daddy and Mama bought me. They bought me a dog, Robbie. In a moment, she had returned, a frightened little girl. Mama, Robbie isn't in his room. Where is he? There was no answer, and George Weston coughed and was suddenly extremely interested in an aimlessly drifting cloud. Gloria's voice quavered on the verge of tears. Where's Robbie, Mama? Mrs. Weston sat down and drew her daughter gently to her. Don't feel bad, Gloria. Robbie has gone away, I think. Gone away? Where's he gone away, Mama? No one knows, darling. He just walked away. We've looked and we've looked and we've looked for him, but we can't find him. You mean he'll never come back again? Her eyes were round with horror. We may find him soon. We'll keep looking for him, and meanwhile you can play with your nice little doggy. Look at him. His name is Lightning, and he can... But Gloria's eyelids had overflowed. I don't want the nasty dog. I want Robbie. I want you to find me Robbie. Her feelings became too deep for words, and she spluttered into a shrill wail. Mrs. Weston glanced at her husband for help, but he merely shuffled his feet morosely and did not withdraw his ardent stare from the heavens, so she bent to the task of consolation. Why do you cry, Gloria? Robbie was only a machine, just a nasty old machine. He wasn't alive at all. He was not no machine, screamed Gloria fiercely and ungrammatically. He was a person just like you and me, and he was my friend. I want him back. Oh, Mama, I want him back. Her mother groaned in defeat and left Gloria to her sorrow. Let her have her cry out, she told her husband. Childish griefs are never lasting. In a few days she'll forget that awful robot ever existed. But time proved Mrs. Weston a bit too optimistic. To be sure, Gloria ceased crying, but she ceased smiling too, and the passing days found her even more silent and shadowy. Gradually, her attitude of passive unhappiness wore Mrs. Weston down, and all that kept her from yielding was the impossibility of admitting defeat to her husband. And one evening, she flounced into the living room, sat down, folded her arms, and looked boiling mad. Her husband stretched his neck in order to see her over his newspaper. What now, Grace? It's that child, George. I've had to send back the dog today. Gloria positively couldn't stand the sight of him, she said. She's driving me into a nervous breakdown. Weston laid down the paper, and a hopeful gleam entered his eye. Maybe we ought to get Robbie back. It might be done, you know. I can get in touch with the... No, she replied grimly. I won't hear of it. We're not giving up that easily. My child shall not be brought up by a robot if it takes years to break her of it. Weston picked up his paper again with a disappointed air. A year of this will have me prematurely grey. You're a big help, George, was the frigid answer. What Gloria needs is a change of environment. Of course she can't forget Robbie here. How can she when every tree and rock reminds her of him? It is really the silliest situation I have ever heard of. Imagine a child pining away for the loss of a robot. Well, stick to the point. What's the change in environment you're planning? We're going to take her to New York. The city? In August? Say, do you know what New York is like in August? It's unbearable. Millions do bear it. They don't have a place like this to go to. If they didn't have to stay in New York, they wouldn't. Well, we have to. I say we're leaving now or as soon as we can make the arrangements. In the city, Gloria will find sufficient interests and sufficient friends to perk her up and make her forget that machine. Oh, Lord, groaned the lesser half, those frying pavements. We have to, was the unshaken response. Gloria has lost 5 pounds in the last month, and my little girl's health is more important to me than your comfort. It's a pity you didn't think of your little girl's health before you deprived her of her pet robot, he muttered, but to himself. Okay, right, we'll leave it there and pick this up again tomorrow. Okay, see you tomorrow.